Hey, sorry about that. We got interrupted with something. I'm going to carry on reading from chapter 14. Drat that man, Sophie exclaimed. Howl had obviously made sure she would not follow him anywhere. She was putting everything back into the cupboard when somebody knocked at the door. Sophie, as usual, jumped and hoped they would go away. But this person seemed more determined than most. Whoever it was went knocking, or perhaps hurling him or herself at the door, for the sound was more of a steady whoomp, whoomp, whoomp than proper knocking. After 5 minutes they were still doing it. Sophie looked at the uneasy green flickers which were all she could see of Calcifer. "Is it the witch?" "No," said Calcifer, muffled amongst his logs. "It's the castle door. Somebody must be running alongside us. We're going quite fast." "Is it the scarecrow?" Sophie asked, and her chest gave a tremor at the mere idea. "It's flesh and blood," Calcifer said. I've lost my place. Where's it gone? Sorry. This is really annoying, I'm sorry. Here we are, sorry. Oh, goodness, we're a long way from the... here we are, sorry, yeah. "It's flesh and blood," Calcifer said. His blue face climbed up into the chimney, looking puzzled. "I'm not sure what it is, except it wants to come in badly. I don't think it means any harm." Since the whoomp whoomp just kept on, giving Sophie an irritable feeling of urgency, she decided to open the door and put a stop to it. Besides, she was curious about what it was. She still had the second velvet cloak in her hand from turning out the broom cupboard, so she threw it round her shoulders as he went to the door. Calcifer stared. Then, for the first time since she'd known him, he bent his head down voluntarily. Great cackles of laughter came from under the curly green flames. Wondering what the cloak had turned her into, Sophie opened the door. A huge, spindly greyhound leaped off the hillside between the grinding black blocks of the castle and landed in the middle of the room. Sophie dropped the cloak and backed hurriedly away. She'd always been nervous of dogs, and greyhounds are not reassuring to look at. This one put itself between her and the door and stared at her. Sophie looked longingly at the wheeling rocks outside and wondered if it would do any good to yell for Howl. The dog bent its already bent back and somehow hoisted itself onto its lean hind legs. That made it almost as tall as Sophie. It held out its front legs stiffly and heaved upwards again. Then, as Sophie had had her mouth open to yell to Howl, the creature put out what was obviously an enormous effort and surged upwards into the shape of a man in a crumpled brown suit. He had gingerish hair and a pale, unhappy face. "Came from upper folding," panted this dogman. "Love, Letty. Letty sent me. Letty crying, very unhappy. Sent me to told me to stay." He began to double up and shrink before he'd finished speaking. He gave a dog howl of despair and annoyance. "Don't tell Wizard," he whined, and dwindled away inside reddish curly hair into a dog again. A different dog. This time he seemed to be a red setter. The red setter waved its fringed tail and stared earnestly at Sophie from melting, miserable eyes. "Oh dear," said Sophie as she shut the door. "You do have troubles, my friend. You were that collie dog, weren't you? Now I see what Mrs. Fairfax was talking about. That witch wants slaying, she really does. But why's Letty sent you here? If you don't want me to tell Wizard Howl," and the dog growled faintly at the name. But it also wagged its tail and stared appealingly. "All right, I won't tell him," Sophie promised, and the dog seemed reassured. He trotted to the hearth where he gave Calcifer a somewhat wary look and lay down beside the fender in a skinny red bundle. "Calcifer, what do you think?" Sophie said. "This dog is a bespelled human," Calcifer said unnecessarily. "I know, but can you take the spell off him?" Sophie asked. She supposed Letty must have heard, like so many people, that Howl had a witch working for him now. And it seemed rather important to turn the dog into a man again and send him back to upper folding before Howl got out of bed and found him there. "No, I'd need to be linked with Howl for that," Calcifer said. "Then I'll try it myself," Sophie said. Poor Letty, breaking her heart for Howl, and her only other lover a dog most of the time. Sophie laid her hand on the dog's soft rounded head. "Turn back into the man you should be," she said. She said it quite often, but its only effect seemed to be to send the dog deeply to sleep. It snored and twitched against Sophie's legs. Meanwhile, a certain amount of moaning and groaning was coming from upstairs. Sophie kept muttering to the dog and ignored it. A loud, hollow coughing followed, dying away into more moaning. Crashing sneezes followed the coughing, each one rattling the windows and the doors. Sophie found those harder to ignore, but she managed. Went a blown nose like a bassoon into a tunnel. The coughing started again, mixed with moans. Sneezes mixed with the moans and the coughs, and the sounds rose to a crescendo in which Howl seemed to be managing to cough, groan, blow his nose, sneeze and wail gently all at the same time. The doors rattled, the beams in the ceiling shook, and one of Calcifer's logs rolled off the hearth. All right, I get the message," Sophie said, dumping the log back into the grate. "It'll be green slime next. Calcifer, make sure that dog stays where it is." And she climbed the stairs, muttering loudly. "Really, these wizards. You'd think no one had ever had a cold before. Well, what is it?" she asked, hobbling through the bedroom door onto the filthy carpet. "I'm dying of boredom," Howl said pathetically. "Or maybe just dying." He was lying, propped on dirty grey pillows, looking quite poorly, with what might have been a patchwork coverlet over him, except it was all one colour with dust. The spiders he seemed to like so much were spinning busily in the canopy above him. Sophie felt his forehead. "You do have a bit of a fever," she admitted. "I'm delirious," said Howl. "Spots are crawling before my eyes." "Those are spiders," said Sophie. "Why can't you cure yourself with a spell?" "'Cause there is no cure for a cold," Howl said dolefully. "Things are going round and round in my head, or maybe my head is going round and round in things. I keep thinking of the terms of the witch's curse. I hadn't realised she could lay me bare like that. It's a bad thing to be laid bare, even though the things that are true so far are all my own doing. I keep waiting for the rest to happen." Sophie thought back to that puzzling verse. "What things?" "Tell me where all the best years are." "Oh, I know that," Howl said. "My own or anyone else's. They're all there, just where they always were. I could go and play bad fairy at my own christening if I wanted to. Maybe I did, and that's my trouble. No, there are only 3 things I'm waiting for. The mermaids, the mandrake root, and the wind to advance an honest mind. And whether I get white hairs, I suppose, only I'm not going to take the spell off to see. There's only about 3 weeks left for them to come true in, and the witch gets me as soon as they do. But the rugby club reunion is Midsummer Eve, so I'll get to that at least. The rest all happened long ago." "You mean the falling star, and never being able to find a woman true and fair?" said Sophie. "I'm not surprised the way you go on. Mrs. Pentstemon told me you were going to the bad. She was right, wasn't she?" "I must go to her funeral, if it kills me," Howl said sadly. "Mrs. Pentstemon always thought far too well of me. I blinded her with my charm." Water ran out of his eyes. Sophie had no idea if he was really crying or it was simply his cold, but she noticed he was slithering out again. "I was talking about the way you keep dropping ladies as soon as you've made them love you," she said. "Why'd you do it?